The Horse Race is brought to you by Benchmark Strategies, Boston's leading public affairs and public relations consulting firm. To learn more, connect with Benchmark on LinkedIn at Benchmark Strategies or visit benchmark-strategies.com. Welcome back to The Horse Race, your weekly look at politics, policy, and elections in Massachusetts. I'm Steve Koczela, president of the Massing Polling Group, here as always with my co-host Jennifer Smith, reporter for Commonwealth Beacon. Over the past 15 years, Massachusetts has been among the slowest states in America to pass its annual state budget. Today, Jenn and I are joined by Statehouse news reporter Chris Lisinski to talk about why Massachusetts, with huge Democratic majorities in both houses, takes so long to pass its budgets. And why this time, the legislature and Governor Healy got so close to passing the budget on time. It's Thursday, July 10th. So, Jenn, Chris, today we're here to tell a story, one that traverses the vast world of state finance, one that transcends fiscal time and partisan politics and everything else, frankly. Chris, as a reporter for Statehouse News, you know as much as anyone on planet Earth about how the Massachusetts state legislature works. So welcome.
Thank you. It's not a particularly transferable skill. Really, that knowledge and that ability pretty much limits my professional and personal options.
I was going to say, as someone who does enjoy going to a bar with people who do nothing but talk about what it means when a bill is sent to study, that does not play well when you're not around just reporters all the time. And, of course, your honorary pollster, Steve.
Yes, it's true. We just hang out at bars and talk about budgets, and you know what's the day when they like have to get certain things in. There's like a certain chapter day or something like that.
Joint Rule 10 Day.
Joint Rule 10 Day.
Get it together, Steve.
I know.
I was going to make a
That's why I hang
joke.
out with you all. This is why I hang out with you all, because I don't have to remember Joint Rule 10 Day. Anyway, glad to be here with Jenn, Chris, two of the most knowledgeable people on this issue, because we're talking about the budget and how this year was different. So, Chris, first, what are the major steps in passing the state budget?
Even on a hypothetical on-time timeline, this is a 5-month process at minimum. The governor in most years rolls out a budget proposal in January to kick off the process. The House and Senate do months of review, hold lots of hearings across the state. House passes its own redraft, typically in April. Senate then follows up with its own redraft, typically in May. And then the whole thing gets shuttled behind closed doors for top Democrats to haggle over the differences and land on a final plan sometime between June and August.
Sometime between June and August leaves sort of a lot of leeway, right? I mean, to set it up, when is it actually supposed to be done?
On paper, the fiscal year starts July 1st, as is the case in many, many other states. I think most states, but not all, have fiscal years that begin July 1st. Most states, besides Massachusetts, get annual budgets signed into law ahead of that July 1st start of the fiscal year. That is not the case here, and even though this budget was done quicker than it has been in quite some time, it once again was not the case here.
But Jenn, we came so close this year, right?
Yes, I mean, technically, what happened is lawmakers sent to Governor Healy a budget that had made it through their conference committees before July started. But, and I'm very sorry for everybody who, wants to shoot off the confetti at that one, the governor has 10 days to review that budget, send it back with any changes or vetoes, and then the legislature gets to figure out what it wants to do with those vetoes, if it wants to pursue any overrides. So the best we can say is we have gotten the closest that we have been in 15 years at getting the budget in on time, and what that means is that we had a budget before July.
Okay, so we missed the deadline by a little bit, much less than we've missed it in past years. So what is the actual practical impact of missing this deadline?
There's really not much, and I think that's a reason that it has become such a norm. It bothers those of us in the press who like to point out these deadlines, but because Democrats have supermajority margins in both chambers, they can very easily pass an interim budget. They'll call it a 1/12 sometimes, that's the jargon, because it's about a month of spending at a time. That was the case again this year, as it has been for many previous years. There's a temporary spending plan in place. There's no government shutdown like you'd see in D.C. if they failed to produce a spending package on time. So accounts are still being paid, payroll is still going out in that gap between the start of the fiscal year and the actual enactment of the annual budget.
And that's just thinking about the fiscal impact of things. That's not even touching the political implications, which are also pretty much nothing here. As we've talked about ad nauseum on this podcast over the years, Massachusetts has a deeply uncompetitive set of state races. There's not a lot of challenges to incumbents. It's very, very hard to overcome both name recognition and the war chests that these legislatures have built up over the years. And because of all of that, it means that it's relatively actually hard to, one, get the public interested in what it means to have a state budget that's late when, the bills are still being paid, things are still rolling along. And then on the other side, what would they do if they actually were annoyed about this, aside from kind of, raise a great hue and cry, but probably still vote the same people back into office the next term. So it's, I think, the combination of those two things that if you wanted to be generous about it, you could say lawmakers probably look at this and say, I don't really think this is a priority for our voters, so we'd rather treat these as big policy packages that we want to refine as much as possible and then get through whenever they're in the best situation.
And we should also be clear that it's not just the budget that the legislature often gets done late. Other bills also seem to languish and often are done at, or even after, the very last minute, or what we thought was the very last minute. So, Chris, what are the conflicts within the legislature that makes it so difficult to pass either the budget or other major pieces of legislation on a more timely basis?
As has been the case since time immemorial, basically, there is a heated rivalry, a butting of heads between House Democrats and Senate Democrats. Again, it's not like D.C., where whichever party is in control is more or less unified to advance a singular party goal. The House Democrats and the Senate Democrats have their own ideas. There's a Venn diagram. They agree on quite a lot, and they also disagree on a pretty substantial amount. Not just big policy issues, but sometimes they disagree on just the basic details on how something should be rolled out. And each side really cares about those basic details and wants things done its way. That fundamental dynamic slows things down quite a lot. And folks are pretty happy to drag out the negotiating process as long as it takes to get the upper hand over the other branch.
And of course, we've seen this reach sort of absurdist heights over the past few years. One that comes to mind is just how long it took them to agree on what the rules were of the chambers themselves. So when the two chambers can't agree on how they would like to procedurally tackle the legislation that's in front of them, it can get a little bit silly for people watching from the outside saying, well, I know that you're going to take a long time to figure out how much of your money gets spent on education versus transportation. Those are big policy differences that might exist between these chambers. But what do you mean you can't decide on the rules of the way that you're going to operate your committee? So that sort of thing can come up and be completely wild.
They do often get the goals done eventually. We should say that in fairness, but I think back to where we started talking about the topics we like to chat about at bars. What a very common topic at bars around Beacon Hill is, can you believe what the House did? Or can you believe what the Senate did? Coming from staff and lawmakers in either chamber complaining about the other one.
And what kinds of things might they be talking about?
The way that a bill might move, a disagreement on which committee a bill might go to, a lack of action on something that one branch deems a top priority and the other branch deems not at all important to advance, the way that legislators in one branch might answer a question to the press that puts the other branch in a less than favorable spotlight. I could go on and on.
Just sometimes it is about how legislators are talking about the legislation that they would like to enact, because, as we've alluded to, a lot of the actual kind of hashing out of what these final bills looks like is happening behind closed doors. So the insight into what has a good chance or a bad chance of emerging from behind those doors often ends up kind of being a game of telephone, either through conversations with staffers or lawmakers that are either on background or off the record, or trying to parse the limited things that they'll say in these brief public announcements. And so you might know what they're fighting over, but you might not know kind of who has the upper hand in the negotiation at any given time. And so there can be some annoyance when the implication is that the other house is about to cave.
A lot of these sound like super esoteric issues, but from what you're saying, they kind of add up to these delays that we're talking about, both in the budget and with major pieces of legislation. But what's one kind of concrete example that stands out to you as something that pushed the timeline way back in a way that the public might not have even understood or appreciated at the time?
Yeah, the one that I always think of was actually on the record in full public view last summer when City of Boston, Mayor Wu and her deputies were trying to get Beacon Hill to approve a short-term shift in the commercial residential property tax split. The House voted on it, and while talking about that vote, Speaker Ron Mariano said something about a bill coming up in the Senate, kind of implied that he didn't know why this other unrelated bill was moving so quickly, thought that maybe senators didn't do the full review. A day or two later, we asked Senate President Karen Spilka about the transfer tax issue, and she pulled out a printed out copy of the exact words that Mariano used to criticize the Senate 2 days earlier and recited them verbatim to take a shot at the House over the transfer tax vote. So it's very obvious that they notice what the other one is doing, and they keep score against the other one, even when ostensibly and, in practice, they are working towards similar goals.
Okay, and this has led to slow budgets for, it seems like a decade or more now, right? Like we're many years into this pattern of submitting budgets that are late.
Yeah, the Mass Taxpayers Foundation, credit to them for pulling budget dates going back to, I believe, the turn of the millennium. From what they found, I think the last time we had an on-time budget was fiscal 2011, so 15 years ago. But even that was, once in a rare while to be so on time.
And it seems like this came to a bit of a head in 2024 when not just the budget, but really it seemed like a ton of major legislation was even slower, even more contentious than usual. So, Jen, could you describe the public and, because you had a front row seat, the media reaction to the 2024 session particularly?
So in 2024, there were sort of a series of issues rolling across Massachusetts, and one that might come to mind was dealing with the fallout from the Steward Healthcare Center bankruptcy case, where we were looking at all of these community hospitals that suddenly seemed like they were very much in danger, and it turned out a few of them very specifically were. And this was at the same time as the House and the Senate were trying to figure out what to do with a huge healthcare bill, and that was kind of jammed up in the middle of all of this other end of session legislation. And so that was one of the things that was caught in the middle. Another thing that was caught in the middle of these kinds of political waves was what are we doing around our energy policy? There were major environmental and health bills that were also getting jammed up on top of the actual budget, which was, of course, late. Chris, I'm sure I'm missing something, but what was it looking like from inside the Statehouse? Because at Commonwealth, we have a little bit of an advantage where we get to kind of take a macro view, but you were sitting there watching people running by every single day looking panicked.
They did something last year that, for all of the years of dysfunction and sluggish lawmaking, was really unusual. They left in August with most of the big issues unfinished and unresolved. And they came back over the course of late summer and the fall and early winter and finished that up, did the mop-up work during a stretch of the calendar that for 2.5 decades has basically deemed any major work off limits so everybody can focus on campaign season and not get into any iffy ethical quid pro quo areas. That shift in practice bled directly into what we've seen this term, which is, it took us time to get there, but it is here and fully in place now. a very significant overhaul of the legislative calendar as laid out in the internal House and Senate rules. So moving forward, things are going to be different. Basically embracing and kind of formalizing and trying to clean up what we saw on an ad hoc basis last year.
So basically, just to summarize, they reopened the doors in a way. They'd all left town as they normally do, and usually any big things that are not done just remain undone until the new session while everybody goes off and campaigns for re-election. But this time they kind of decided they had to come back. So that's where we left it in 2024. Lawmakers had to basically come back and reopen the doors because they'd left so much undone. The media and public outcry, honestly, was very significant. And then that brings us forward to this session when it seems like things have unfolded a bit differently. So what was different about the way the process has unfolded this time?
Like we briefly mentioned, there are new rules in place. There are new deadlines in place. And I think key, which we might not have touched on before, Jen, all of this is playing out after voters overwhelmingly embraced a ballot question whose basic underlying message was, we don't like the way that you work behind closed doors. We want to see what's going on back there. This, of course, is the Audit the Legislature push led by Auditor Diana DiZoglio. It has not gone anywhere so far. Legislators continue to resist this on constitutional separation of powers grounds. That's a whole fight that we don't have time to get into. But I think that did change the climate because as much as they might not want to admit it, lawmakers are feeling a lot of heat and a lot of pressure from that.
And I think that's just a really good tie-in to what we were talking about at the start of this episode, which is, what do consequences look like if lawmaking does not happen at an expeditious pace? If your voters are not voting you out, if there is no kind of big financial tsunami that follows after failure to pass a budget on time, what does opposition look like? And it just happened to be at the exact moment that we had a very clear way to measure just how annoyed voters might be at the same lawmakers that they were consistently voting for. And so this is where your extremely transferable skills, Steve Koczela, might actually come into it, because the state auditor, Diana DiZoglio, a former legislator herself, said we should be able to basically pry open the legislature's books and take a look at how they are operating. They get to craft their own rules. Are they following their own rules? That sort of thing. And so that's really what's been under debate here, is basically, can an outside entity force its way into the legislative process, peel open those books and say, explain yourselves? And that is still under debate, but I think we saw pretty overwhelmingly that voters said, that seems worth a try.
Yes, definitely. I mean, it passed by a very wide margin. It also came amidst a decline in the state legislature's approval rating. So I think that, Jen, I would agree with your characterization that it seemed like there was more voter discontent, even if there's really nothing that they could have done with it, even if there's really not enough opposition for them to legitimately vote for somebody else that they might think was better. There at least was some sign of, consequences in the ether, even if it didn't translate into additional seats won. But I do want to turn then over to the budget itself, because it was a very unusual year in the sense that the Trump administration was threatening all kinds of funding streams. There have been lawsuits about various funding streams. Amidst all of this kind of imprecision about how much money we might actually have access to, how did they actually do it?
The way that they proceeded really is the way that they always proceed. They acknowledged, they wrung their hands publicly over and over again about the prospect of federal funding cuts, but every top lawmaker we've spoken to has said that they ultimately concluded that the best thing they can do is move forward with the information they have and figure out the fallout later. The way that the final timing worked out is, I think, the so-called Big Beautiful Bill was signed into law the same day that Governor Healy signed the budget, maybe just a few hours after. So it is going to take some time for even the brightest minds in the state budget offices to figure out, okay, how many dollars are we actually going to lose here? And lawmakers essentially said, we will figure that out either in next year's budget or in a mid-year spending plan. Let's go with the estimates that we relied on all along and build in a couple of cushions here and there just to make the job a little bit easier down the line.
And on the other side of the ledger, of course, we have the millionaire's tax, which, one of the things about the debate over the millionaire's tax when it was first being voted on was, is this going to cause this big flight of people that make more than $1 million out of Massachusetts? And therefore, revenue projections that we're all hoping for are going to fall way short. That was kind of the debate at the time. Instead, something else has happened. So, Chris, first of all, how much money is the millionaire's tax actually bringing in relative to what we thought?
I think the fiscal 2025 numbers for the fiscal year that just ended June 30th is somewhere in the neighborhood of $3 billion. That's much more than lawmakers included in the annual budget for that fiscal year. They intentionally went conservative. They used a low estimate just in case. But because they used a low estimate in the annual budget, they had a big pot of about $1.3 billion that was already collected, not attached to anything, that they said, you know what, let's just send this money out now. Education, you're all getting hundreds of millions of dollars in a mid-year injection.
And that's slightly complicated, the math for this year, right? Just having these big amounts of money that we didn't necessarily have in the original budget has made it a little bit harder to figure out, like, who gets what, who has what in this new year.
It goes together, yeah, and the debate went together. Lawmakers in particular were pitching it as between the fiscal 2025 SUP and the fiscal 2026 annual budget, the T will get X.
Okay, well, I'm definitely going to need a flow chart on that last bit, but we do need to turn just for the last minute here into actual policy, like what actually happened with this budget. So quick question for each of you. What was one thing that stood out as far as like what the legislature did that everyday people might observe in their own lives?
One of the most significant policy riders, so to speak, is that broker fees are essentially a thing of the past. Renter paid broker fees, that is. The final budget has language requiring that whichever party enters into a contract with a real estate broker is the one who has to pay the broker. In most cases, that's going to be the landlord, so new renters moving into an apartment theoretically will only have to pay 3 months of rent upfront, first, last, and security deposit, instead of 4 months, first, last, security deposit, and a broker's fee.
So your bill will go down from $16,000 to move in down to $12,000, so much more affordable.
Don't say that. That's haunted.
Jen, how about you? What was something that stood out to you?
I mean, the big one, which we've sort of touched on, is just the amount of money we were able to orient toward the MBTA this year. Between the supplemental budget and the final budget that's been signed into law, the T is getting a massive, massive investment, which of course is going to go to, presumably, continuing their changes around trainings and operations, fixing the actual underlying infrastructure, kind of plugging that massive fiscal deficit that we've talked about many times. Because again, if you think about the train, and I am thinking about what General Manager of the MBTA, Phil Eng, told Commonwealth just this last week, which was when he came in here, kind of near the start of the Healy administration, he was like, if we go in this direction, we might have to shut the system down. This is how bad it's looking. And so the fact that after a few years of this new millionaire's tax revenue coming in, they're basically saying stabilization is a real thing that we can look at and simultaneously also look at these long-term improvements. This is the first year that it's felt like there is the money to kind of really do that. Before, it's sort of been kind of stabilizing and plugging these gaps, but between the SUP and the final budget, the T is going to be much, much closer to being able to actually operate.
There's a long way to go at the T still. There are still storm clouds. There's not a 10-year plan in place. But we should note that a lot of other transit agencies around the country are making service cuts or raising fares, and at least right now, neither of those are on the table at the T.
All right, well, highlights from our almost ever so close to on-time budget for this year. Chris, thanks for joining Jen and me.
It is always a pleasure.
We'll be right back.
I'm Zainab Asma Doyle, Research Manager at the Massink Polling Group. So much in politics these days concentrates power and influence in the hands of people who already have it. Public opinion research gives ordinary people a seat at the table and a chance to be heard. Surveys and focus groups can elevate and amplify voices that otherwise would not be heard.
Find out more at massingpolling.com.
And that brings us to our final segment, which this week comes to us from the actual horse racing department here at the horse race. Steve, you went to, it says here, right here in the script, an actual horse race. Did they have a race named after us this time?
I did go to an actual horse race. And for those unfamiliar, we actually did, the Horse Race podcast had a horse race named after us when we did a day at Suffolk Downs 5,000 years ago before it closed down. This time I went to Saratoga. I went to the horse race. I bought a hat, and I even won some money by using ChatGPT to take a photograph of the odds in the infield and then asking it what I should do.
And how did your garbage robot machine do, Steve?
It won. It won first, and then it lost. So it won, this is the explanation, it won when it properly read the board, and then the next race when it misread the board and had me bet on a horse that was like, 25 to 1 odds, then I lost. So I ended up with the same amount of money that I walked in with.
But, a glow in your heart and a spring in your step and a hat on your head.
And a hat, yes, and definitely a newfound appreciation for both the potential and limitations of betting using large language models.
Don't do it, kids. That's all the time we have for today. I'm Jennifer Smith signing off with Steve Koczela. Our producer is Charlie Koczela. You can write to us at thehorseracepodcast@gmail.com. And don't forget to give The Horse Race a review wherever you're hearing us now if you want to help other people find us. Subscribe to Commonwealth Beacon's daily download. Plus, reach out to the Mass Inc. polling group if you need polls or focus groups done. Thank you all for listening. See you next week.